Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Mind of Sai Marie. I'm your host, Sai Marie Johnson, and today we are stepping into the shadows to talk about the things that we hide in the cost of the truth. Joining me is the author of the gripping new novel, Aisha's Secret. Please welcome Zachary Hagen to the show. Zachary, it is great to have you here today.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks you so much for having me on.
So, Aisha's Secret carries a lot of fantasy right in the title. Without giving too much away, what was the initial spark that led you to Aisha and the specific secret that she's carrying?
It was actually a TikTok live that I hosted several years ago. And I was talking about different ideas for books. And I talked about my love for fairy tale retellings. I had, at the time, recently read The Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer, and I just absolutely loved those. And I was trying to ask my audience about different fairy tales that they might want to revisit, and one idea was Aladdin, and the idea for that kind of snowballed into what if it was told from the princess's perspective, but she wasn't really the princess.
That's interesting. Obviously, in suspenseful or fantasy and mystical driven narratives, pacing is everything. How do you decide when to give the reader a piece of the puzzle and when to withhold information to keep the tension high?
I think that really comes in with plotting for me. I am not one of those authors that can just start a story and write without having a plan. And so I really carefully decide where to put those twists or where to reveal something. Like with Aisha, one of the biggest reveals is really late in the novel, but it amps up the stakes at just the right moment that pushes that final reaction into place.
So, the protagonist, Aisha, has to navigate a world that feels increasingly precarious, obviously. So, how did you approach building her internal world to make her feel relatable even in extreme circumstances?
I think my main concern was making her feel authentic, because if she has a established personality and she feels like a real person, then it's easy to predict how she'd react to things. And so I really focused a lot on who she was and what her values were and what would carry her through those situations so that she kind of answered those questions for me.
Secrets often have a ripple effect on every character in a book. How does Aisha's secret challenge the relationships and trust of the secondary characters around?
Yeah, because she has to keep this secret in order to maintain her life according to the rules of the magic. Her secret kind of has this balance of, if she tells, then she loses everything. But if she doesn't, can people really trust her?
Okay, kind of pivoting away. As an author in 2026, where digital footprints and privacy are constant topics of conversation, did any current events influence the way you wrote about a character trying to keep something hidden?
I don't think it really did, mostly because it's so removed from our world. I didn't even touch on social media at all, but it is an important topic, and it's something that I think that should be explored even in fantasy more, especially if it's a more like urban or modern fantasy. So maybe it is something that I should have touched on, and if I ever get the chance to rewrite it as, I don't know, a screenplay or something, that might be something that comes into the plot, because it is so much a part of the way that we relate to each other today.
That's an interesting little bit of inspiration we might have given you here on the show. Your writing style has a very cinematic quality, and you just touched on maybe a screenplay. So, do you see your scenes as a film while you are drafting, or are you more focused on the internal prose?
Well, I absolutely see it as a film. I think that's probably one of the reasons I love writing so much, is because I experience books that way. And so whenever I'm writing, it is kind of like watching a movie in slow motion in a way. And sometimes I can't get it out fast enough, and I'm trying to catch up with what I'm kind of imagining and seeing in my head.
I can relate to that. I am very similar in my own style. So, every fantasy author has a favorite red herring. Was there a particular direction you tried to lead the reader that was especially fun to write?
I think what a lot of readers might get stuck on is the romance side of things. And while that's a really important piece of Aisha's story, ultimately, I think what her story is about is more internal and coming to terms with what's important beyond the self. And so I think that that's probably something that might trip some readers up, where they'll be so focused on the romance that they won't see Aisha's growth until the very end. But it's there if they're looking for it.
So, what is your personal philosophy on the perfect ending? Do you prefer to leave readers with a lingering question, or do you believe in typing up every loose thread?
I think it completely depends on the type of book that I'm reading. With Aisha, because I wasn't anticipating continuing her story, there aren't many loose threads left for her. But in my previous series, The Eternal Chronicles, every book except for the last book had cliffhangers and questions that were raised at the end that would keep readers ready for the next book.
So, research is often overlooked in, well, contemporary suspenses, but I know this is more of a fantasy. Was there any specific area of expertise, psychological, mystical, or otherwise, that you had to dive into for this book?
Oh, absolutely. I think particularly because I was trying to draw from Middle Eastern and Indian cultures, I did a lot of research in the names of things and the significance of jinn in their mythology. And so I think that research, you're right, is often overlooked, but it shouldn't be. I think research, especially if you're taking influence from real world cultures, needs to be a part of the pre-writing process. The only time that I haven't done research is really with actually a current project, because I'm completely inventing the world and not really taking a whole lot of influence from any real cultures. But anytime I do, I'm always researching the culture, the way that names are formatted, and building from there.
So, for readers who are discovering your work for the first time with Aisha's Secret, what is the one thing you want them to know about your author brand?
They should expect to learn something. I'm a teacher at heart. And so while I do seek to entertain with my books, I also seek to really have something to sink your teeth into that's more than just the story. One of my influences was C.S. Lewis, and I really loved how his books always had a deeper meaning and a deeper truth to them beyond just what was on the page. And so that's something that I seek to do in my writing as well.
So, how has your approach to the first draft changed since you started your career as a novelist?
My first draft of Eternity's Well, my first book, was so haphazard in comparison. Um, because I kind of just started drafting it with very loose ideas and kind of a rough sketch of a plot. And only because I was determined to have kind of a direction to go, because I started writing it for a college class. Now, 6 novels in, my approach is a lot more methodical, because I found that the more detailed and exacting my plotting can be, the faster the novel gets written. I think total hours that I spent in Eternity's Well might have been somewhere around 300 to 500 hours of writing. Whereas even though it took longer to get it out just because my life was a little bit more hectic, the total time I spent writing Aisha's Secret was significantly lower. I would say probably around the 150 to 200 hours mark.
So, for aspiring authors who are currently stuck in the middle of their fantasy, what is your best advice for reconnecting with the story's heartbeat?
I think ultimately, fantasies that are really good have one of two approaches. They are either extremely world and plot driven, or they are extremely character driven. And so the advice is to dig into wherever that base is. If it's the plot, make sure the story still makes sense. Make sure each plot point connects to the previous one and the one in front of it in a logical way. And if it's character driven, spend some time digging back into who the characters are. Or if you don't know them that well, get to know them and make sure that you know enough about them that you could reasonably say whether or not they would prefer a Cadbury egg or a Reese's cup. Like, maybe that's a little bit of a ridiculous thing to wonder, but if you know that about your characters, then you know them well enough that your character-driven novel can move smoothly.
So, I think you kind of touched on this with saying you had no more loose threads for Aisha's Secret, but do you think that Aisha's journey is a closed chapter, or are there more secrets in her world that you are planning to explore in the future?
I think her story, in as much as was explored in the book, is pretty much over, but I did leave enough of an open end in some part of the book that I could still write within that world. It just probably wouldn't be anything else in Aisha's story. She might make a cameo in another book, in another fairy tale retelling, but I think that it'll be more of a loosely related thing rather than a direct continuation.
And finally, for the creative who feels their work might be too niche or specific, what is your advice for finding the sweet spot where your unique voice meets a broad audience?
I don't think that there is a niche that is too niche. I once was in a airport bookstore and there was a book for erotic stories for Punjabi widows, I think was the title. Not that I'm necessarily suggesting writing that, but clearly the fact that there were like something 20, 50 of those books sitting on that display, the bookstore knew that they would sell at least, a percentage of them. So, and that's a niche I didn't know existed, right? So, if there is an interest that someone holds, there is a community out there that's looking for it. I don't think that every book needs to have mass market appeal. Sometimes it's enough for 300 people to have purchased a book and really love it because it was written for them. I guess it depends on the goals. If your goal is traditional mass market success, then follow the trends. But if your goal as an author is to write what you love and enjoy it and occasionally find some success within a larger market, then follow the passion.
Zachary, thank you for peeling back the layers of the story for us. It's been a pleasure having you at the table today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
To our listeners, if you're looking for your next page turner, go grab Aisha's Secret today, and I will have a link to it in the show's description notes. I'm Sai Marie Johnson, and this has been the Mind of Sai Marie. Until next time, remember, the mind is the most important story that we'll ever tell.